This is Cars and Bids, and today we're going to do a market report. I'm going to look back on the last few weeks of Cars and Bids sales, and I'm going to tell you some thoughts that I have, go through a few cars that sold for their prices and tell you what I think about their markets, some interesting trends I'm noticing worth discussing. So let's do it. Cars and Bids market report. Okay, first car I want to highlight, actually the first two cars I want to highlight. This 2014 BMW 328i wagon and this 2003 Porsche 911 Carrera 4S. BMW sold for $28,000, the Porsche sold for just over $30,000. These two cars are a fantastic example of what happens when you combine a great car and no reserve. I know a lot of sellers are nervous about doing no reserve, and I understand that, and a lot of the cars that we sell have reserves, about 60% have reserves. But when you have a truly great car and when you have no reserve, there's nothing to worry about in the auction. Like, the car will get to what it's worth. And because it's no reserve, there's more interest, there's more excitement, and those cars tend to get even more bids and even more interest. And that's certainly the case here. This BMW 328i, this is a great car. I mean, Astora Blue, the best BMW color of all time. It's a wagon. It has a stage 1 tune, so it's faster than a regular wagon. It's a one-owner car. It has all the options. Like, this car was destined for greatness from day one. We could have put a reserve on it. The owner came and said, nope, I'm gonna take the risk. And his risk paid off. $28,000, a lot of money for an 88,000 mile 2014 BMW wagon. But it's a great car. This is a great example of one of these. And if you want a nice one, you're gonna pay. And no reserve just adds to the excitement. And that was also true of this 996 Carrera 4S. This car had over 100,000 miles, which is a strong number for a C4S, a 996 C4S. But this car was tremendously well maintained. Everything in this car, it had a new IMS bearing, it had extensive service history, obviously a 6-speed manual. It's an unusual color, which is a big deal these days. People with Porsches love these unusual colors. And the seller knew the history of the car. He was very confident in the car, and he just wasn't worried about it selling. So he put it up no reserve, and I think the car did unusually well considering the mileage, but it's also, again, a great example of this car. And I wouldn't tell people to go no reserve if they have a car with a bunch of flaws and they're just not sure if there will be a lot of interest, but there's no reason you show up with a car that is clearly going to do well. We've sold 1 million of these 911s, and I still get people email and say, what if my 911 sells for $500? I'm like, I'll buy it. It won't. That's not gonna happen. We have 100,000 users. The car will not sell for that money. But the sellers who are willing to take the risk, it does pay off, especially if you have an excellent car that you really believe in. Something comes up during the auction, you're surprised by, oh yeah, it's been repainted, I didn't notice that. Well, then that's a problem. But if you have a good car, you've owned it from new, it's well equipped, good spec, the sky's the limit. There's no reason not to. Okay, next up, the next group of cars I want to talk about is the survivor cars, or really actually the low mileage cars. Something I am noticing, an interesting trend I've noticed recently is cars with ultra low miles, especially desirable cars, are bringing really good money. Now, I mentioned in a recent video on Cars and Bids that survivor cars are bringing good money. So like 90s, 80s cars that don't have many miles, they're doing well. But it's not just those. And that's sort of an interesting thing that I'm really starting to see. One good example, this 2011 Subaru STI sold for $38,000, only 14,000 miles on it. Obviously, this Infiniti Q45, 92 Q45 with under 9,000 miles brought $27,000. That was a big sale on the site. This Mercedes SLS AMG Roadster with only 600 miles brought almost $171,000. And this 2000 BMW 750iL brought $25,500 with only 30,000 miles. None of these cars are worth anything close to their sale prices here if you multiply the mileage by 4 or 5. Now, obviously that's true of a lot of cars. Higher miles gets you less money, what a surprise. But what's interesting to me about these is ultra low miles gets you a lot more money. So you know that a high mileage car sells for less, a low mileage car sells for more, but an ultra low mile car, if you can find this 2011 STI with 14,000 miles, there are no more blue STI hatchbacks. That's it. They don't make them anymore. They won't make them anymore. This is it. So if you're looking for this car, it's like, well, this is it. This is what I'm going to spend because I know I will literally never find another one of these. And frankly, that's also true of this SLS. $171,000, that's good money for a Roadster SLS. Regular Roadsters without low miles are selling for 90 to 110. But this car, 600 miles, it's like new. And you're never going to find another one like this ever again. You just aren't. And so it's interesting to me, like the low mile cars bring money, but ultra low mile cars can bring way, way more money. And we're seeing that more and more. And so when people come and pitch cars to us, submit cars to us that have really low miles, it's like, yeah, done. I mean, we sold that Toyota FJ Cruiser a few months ago for $50,000, had like 500 original miles on it. That's what happens. People are never going to be able to find some of these cars again. And I think it's interesting because when we started this site, I don't think I quite realized the difference between a low mileage car and an ultra low mileage car. And now I'm starting to realize the amount of interest, the amount of excitement that a car with truly like non-replaceable, like you're not going to find another 600-mile SLS. Those cars bring a lot more interest. Okay, next car I want to talk about this 1987 Humvee. We have now sold 3 or 4 maybe military Humvees. And what happens is with these, the government owns them, obviously, they use them in the military, and then they're decommissioned and the government sells them at auction. And typically the kind of people who buy them at auction, they just want to like take them mudding, you know, you can pick them up for like 10 grand. It's like way less than what a AMG, like a Hummer, a civilian ones are like 30, 40 at least. So people buy these things. Now, a few people have been able to get them titled. Not every state will do it. Because they were originally sold to the military, and I don't think they have 17-digit VINs. Yeah, they don't. But some states title them. And obviously, once you have a title in one state, it becomes a lot easier to get titles in other states. So just getting in that door means even more doors open for that. And so we're only taking these when they're titled. But this one sold for $28,000. That's a ton of money for a Humvee. But what we're finding is these are bringing a ton of money. And I have talked... I think we've sold every single one that we've had on this site. We have offered 4 military Hummers and all 4 have sold. And I think what we're finding is, I have talked on this channel before about how off-road SUVs do well. And I've specifically mentioned Land Cruisers and G-Wagons. Well, here's another example. It's not necessarily the first thing you'd think of if you're looking for an off-road or SUV. These don't have a lot of creature comforts, but they're incredibly cool and incredibly capable. And there's no reason why Humvees shouldn't also be doing well as off-road or SUVs, just like Defenders and G-Wagons and Discoveries and Land Cruisers. Add Humvee to the list. And I think we're going to try to accept more and more of these because frankly, they do well, they're cool, they're really cool, and they're just neat to see on the site. Okay, next up, another car I want to talk about, sort of a one-off. There's not really a theme to this one, but this 2011 Lexus ISF sold for almost $32,000. Interesting. The ISF is an interesting car. It's kind of hard to value. There's not that many for sale at any given time. They didn't make that many. And people have pitched them to us, submitted them to us, and wanted really high reserves. And I'm like, I don't think so. But this car did better than I expected. I think one of the interesting things about the ISF is it gives you the it's a wide body car, looks cool. This color is the color. The blue ones I'm sure sell for way more. I think it was the only really desirable color for this car. Blue ISF to me still turns my head all the way around when I see one, much more than a 458 or anything. But the thing about this car that I think is also interesting is they're reliable. They have this reputation of being reliable. So you had a naturally aspirated 5-liter V8 that sounds pretty good and had good power. It was 416 horsepower. It was 370 pound-feet of torque. It was a quick car. But instead of getting like an E92 M3 where there's all these issues you have to address, or maybe if you haven't had a performance car before and you're just trying to dip your toe in, you don't want to go down that road, well, the ISF is maybe a pretty cool car for you. And I hope we get more of these on the site because they're neat cars, and frankly, I don't think they're going to lose tremendously too much value. I think these are always going to have some appeal among enthusiasts. It was a low production run. It's a special and cool car. It's too bad they didn't do it with a manual transmission because then they'd be selling for really serious money. But it's a neat car and it's worth mentioning. Okay, next up, this is a big one. I hope that everybody who looks at the site, watches this video, and sees me talk about this. Ford trucks. We posted for sale, a 2000 Ford F350. And then a couple weeks later, earlier, I don't remember, we also posted a 2004 Ford Excursion. And both times, I get messages. We get messages on social media. We get messages on the site, on the comments, saying, why would you post like a Ford pickup? Ugh. What is that, 2000 Ford F350? These are everywhere in my town in Texas. Yeah, well, they're not everywhere with this mileage. And then they sell it. Everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe how much money it got. Yeah, well, if you paid attention to the market, you wouldn't be surprised at all. This 2000 Ford F350 is a really impressive truck. When this thing was submitted to us, I went on AutoTrader to try to find like what it's worth. It is the lowest mileage one that would be, that's for sale. All of these have 200, 300, 400,000 miles, especially with the 7.3 diesel. That's a serious engine that can go forever. This truck has 20 years of life left in it of towing. and hauling. I'm not saying it just has 20 more years of driving. I mean 20 more years of serious labor can be got out of this truck. So it sells for $23,500 and he's like, oh, I'm so surprised. Well, pay attention. The market on these trucks is amazing. And we sell this Ford Excursion, 2004 Ford Excursion with only 38,000 miles. Now this has the 6-liter diesel V8. It's not as strong of an engine. You need to do a few things to it in order to make it bulletproof, they call it. And that can be expensive, but this truck's only got 38,000 miles. You're 100,000 miles away from having to do the bulletproofing stuff. And then you do that and you get another 300,000 miles out of it. And again, it sells for 25,000. Everybody's like, oh my God, I'm surprised. Well, you wouldn't be if you paid attention to the Excursion market. And this is the thing about these old Ford trucks. We're not going to stop selling them on Cars and Bids as long as they keep coming in as nice as these, because they sell and they sell for real money and there are a lot of people looking for them. This Excursion got 25 bids. The F350 got 29 bids. There's people out there who want these trucks, especially when they're in this condition. And so to me, market report is if you can find a low mileage workhorse vehicle that was known for its workhorse, that will be worth a ton, because a new F350 is a $70,000 truck. And so this one, this 2000 model, for 23 grand, you still have years of life left in it. If you want to use it as a workhorse, or you can just kind of preserve it as sort of a low mileage novelty. But the point is, these workhorse vehicles are worth a lot. Excursion, this is also true for because they never followed it up. The Excursion was beyond the Suburban. It was like a step beyond because it was a Super Duty full-size SUV. And so it could tow and it could haul and it could carry a bunch of people. It's a big deal. And people who like want to bring their whole family and a horse trailer, this is the kind of car. And so the Excursion is also really desirable. They're not making these vehicles anymore. Finding a low mileage one, you pay 25 grand. That's what you do because people who are in this market know how hard they are to find. So yes, we will keep running Ford trucks, and yes, they will keep selling for big money, and they deserve to. Last car I want to bring up, 2007 Lexus LX 470. This was a no sale. It was bid to $17,000 and it didn't sell. This is a big surprise to me. So one of the interesting things about Cars and Bids, we've sold like 40 US market Land Cruisers. We've offered like 40 on the site and they've all sold. So this is one of the first, we've missed on a couple of the Lexuses, but this is an 07, it's a final production year. And I really thought this one would sell. And I'm surprised that it did. It was 162,000 miles, but frankly, I thought that $17,000 was a little weak for it. I think it should have gone a little higher. 07s are desirable trucks last year. With as many upgrades and refinements as they can make. But I'm sure if this was a Land Cruiser, it would have brought into the 20s. The Lexus has always pulled a little bit less. But, you know, cool car, just wish we had sold it. Nonetheless, we do incredibly, incredibly well with Land Cruisers. That's like one of our #1 vehicles. They're so cool, they're so special. We just didn't quite get there on this one. And by the way, I always think it's funny, a car doesn't sell. People are just like, oh, Cars and Bids, your reserve is too high. Ah, you jerks, how could you put the reserve that high? It's absurd. Meanwhile, cars sell and people are like, oh, this was a steal. It was a total steal. I'm like, well, which is it? Was it a steal when it sold, or was it too high when it didn't sell? You can't have it both ways. But this truck, we got a lot of flack for too high of a reserve. But I frankly thought that it shouldn't have sold at that number. I think it's worth more. That is your latest Cars and Bids market reports. That LX470 notwithstanding, we are selling at an unbelievable clip, something like 85% sale rate over the last couple of months. It has been really, really crazy. And now you know where to look. Ultra low mileage cars are always going to bring all the money. Really well presented cars with no reserve are always going to bring all the money. Humvees, off-roaders, ISFs I think are going to level, and also Ford trucks. Old workhorse vehicles that still have a lot of life left in them will always bring the money. And so that is your latest market report on Cars and Bids.